What a cool living room you got over there. How's it going?
Yeah, it's like the fireplace is this really cool stone thing. Those are my two kids' portraits
Oh,
of
that
like,
is so cool.
yeah, really nice.
Very cool.
It's going
And
fine.
how was your semester? And where are you teaching again?
I teach at Pacific University just outside of Portland.
Okay, great.
Just less than a week ago, my sister died unexpectedly.
I'm sorry. I believe I saw that. Is this a sister that was over in Europe years ago? Or is that a different sister?
Yeah, she had hijacked an airplane back in the 70s and she moved to Croatia. But it's been interesting because when you cut off contact with a person, which I have done with my sister, I haven't talked to her for like 6 years.
Hmm.
When you cut off contact with someone for abundant good reasons, by the way, and then they die, it's kind of a complicated emotional reality, you know.
Yeah,
I don't have
right.
any regrets or anything about cutting her out of my life. When I did it, it felt very relatively peaceful, you know, in contrast to what it was like when I was interacting with her and stuff. But her death was really sudden. I've been thinking now and then I'm kind of like tossed into this kind of like thought process of just sort of imagining the vulnerability of her dying, I guess, and just how terrifying it would have been. And that increases, obviously, because, you know, this is, you know, it's not like I lack this capacity, but it increases by feeling compassion for her. So there's like this mixture of,
Sure.
you know, feeling a lot of compassion for her and what she apparently went through, but then also like knowing that I didn't want her in my life. It's all just sort of,
Yeah.
it all just sort of is in a blender, emotional blender right now. And I'm thinking a lot about just pivotal moments in our relationship and what made it so difficult to have a true relationship with her. You know, I know this is something that you talk about a lot, you know, cutting people out of your life. And it is an interesting situation when the person that you've cut out of your life dies.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if you've talked about that a lot yourself, but
Yeah, a colleague of mine, and we did a webinar course whether the person is it was a little bit twofold, like when we're caring for a former abuser, like a parent, and they need
right.
some care, and there hasn't been cut off, but just kind of dealing with that lack of closure, having them get it if they experience a cognitive decline, all that stuff, but also. This no contact stuff is always really like messy. It's never really kind of clean the way that it's never supposed to be clean, but I think people don't know what they don't know. But there's a cutoff. Cutoff is really sort of about, I think, like our personal safety and our own personal growth. You know, because I'm probably in the next 5 or 10 years going to experience what you're maybe going through with my own mom. You know, so it's like I don't know what it's going to be like, but from what I hear, it sounds like what it feels like. Thinking about her humanity and how she passed away and her
Mhm.
life trajectory and what she struggled with and
Yes.
what the relationship was like. There's all this kind of heartbreaking stuff when I think about my mom is one part of her is very warm and fun and loving, and another part of her is extremely destructive and unsafe. So when I think about the sadness of something like that, sorry to hijack the conversation about it, but just
No, no, yeah. No, go ahead. We share
I
this.
just kind of think about like it's sad to know that she will pass away, never fully kind of reconciling or knowing herself or feeling good. I mean, it's like sort of just it's like our worst nightmare. We all kind of I believe we all kind of want to pass away feeling good maybe about how some things have gone. It's like, how do you pass away knowing that people don't want to talk to you? Like, that's all that stuff
that's
makes me think about that.
yeah, that's a really interesting question too. I
Yeah.
think what you're saying about like safety is really important. I mean, I feel like that was probably my main motivation for cutting off contact. It's just to feel safer because whenever I had contact, it was always so inevitably gruesome in different ways. And then you have to absorb just sort of like the emotional anguish of it all. And you're like, it's echoing for like days afterwards. And when you end it, you just kind of like, it's sort of like stepping out of a really hot, relentless wind or whatever, and all of a sudden everything is calm and the birds are singing. And like, I don't know,
Yeah.
it was quite remarkable when I was like, I'm just not having contact with her anymore. It was pretty remarkable just what a relief it was. And I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, it comes down to like very like childhood, like infantile almost feelings of safety, I think. I mean, I think
Hmm.
it's a way to look at it.
Yeah.
And then also just like your own, like you were saying, your own growth or just sort of figuring out um, who you want to be without this person in your life who most people in the world thinks needs to be in your life, like if it's a sibling
Yeah.
or a friend, whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
Or they know them to be a wonderful person, and like, you know what I mean? Like, there's
Yeah.
something really wrong with you. How,
Yeah.
as the
You're
kid, everybody.
insane or like,
Yeah.
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 There,
Like,
it's always
everyone.
like, well, there's two sides to every story, so we don't really know what your side. No, we've heard your side, but we haven't heard their side. Like,
Right. These are situations with our families that we wouldn't have chosen. Like, for everyone, we can just feel like just shitty about it, or just bad about it, or shame, or just kind of like figuring out how to feel about it. Cause it's just so, on one hand, when my mom passes away, weirdly, my relationship with her passed away years ago. There's a weird existential feeling that when my mom passes away, I anticipate it, like, kind of going, if you told me, like, oh yeah, Patrick, that lady that you knew from around the block, when that old neighborhood when you were a kid, she finally passed away. And I'd be like, oh, okay, like, it's not going to be without feeling, but I imagine that there's this already removed, and there's already been sort of a death in the relationship. So there's this weird, all right, as fucked up as that sounds.
it is like that for me. I mean, that's the way it's been for me. Like, I haven't cried about my sister dying or anything. It was less than a week ago, and
Oh,
I just feel sort of a blankness about it, and I don't feel guilty about not having a strong, you know, grief response because, like you said, the relationship has been over. And in a way, she's sort of, I mean, this is melodramatic, but in a way, she sort of died to me like 6 years ago or whatever when I just stopped having contact with her. And it's the same
yeah.
with me where my kids have not had any contact with her. I don't think my kids have really wanted to have contact with her because they kind of understand the details of the situation and the reason that I don't talk with her. And I think maybe out of a bit of loyalty to me and my needs and my situation and the history of my family and stuff, they just don't have any. I mean, she's like not a figure who ever comes up, or they're never saying anything along the lines of, I wish we could like email Julie or something like that. That just never
Hmm.
happened. But it is still a weird, I've had a weird, unsettled sort of feeling. I felt off for the last week or so. I went down to the beach and just sort of like absorbed the news. I mean, it happened, I heard about it on Thursday. So less than a week ago, I went down to the beach by myself on Friday and just kind of sat with it. And I don't know, it's a strange atmosphere.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like how we should kind of feel about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
I
just
don't
sort
like,
of,
yeah, I
yeah.
feel you're right. I don't
It's
feel
just
like
like,
I don't ever try and think about how I should feel. I just feel whatever I'm going to feel. And then I don't try to feel anything different,
Right.
it is what, just they come and then they go, healings.
Mm, yeah. Like, well, my condolences, just kind of about it, and just kind of like just the mutual understanding of when we had connected, we both lost. Did you lose a sibling young as well?
Yeah, my brother died in a car accident. That was an entirely different situation where I completely
Yes.
I adored my brother. I loved him deeply. I miss him all the time. He was the only
Hmm.
person in the family that I felt a true emotional connection with.
Yeah.
Literally the only person. And we were very simpatico in a lot of ways, and we would play a lot of music together. So we bonded around that too.
Mm.
So that was catastrophic. I mean, I was in a fucking daze for like weeks after that. It was really devastating and gutting. And back in those days, there was no um, cell phone stuff. I mean, there wasn't. I'm trying to think, was there even email? But anyway, we just got a phone call from the police in the town that he had the crash in, just literally saying, "Your brother's dead," and it was, just
Bluntly, yeah. Right.
yeah. And it was his birthday, and he was driving to see me to have dinner at this Chinese restaurant that he liked a lot in Portland. So he was on his way to see me, and
Oh,
he kept not arriving, not arriving, not arriving, not
yeah.
arriving. So I just like became more and more panicked about what the fuck was going on, and I couldn't like phone him or anything or text him. So at a certain point, it became obvious that something big had happened because he just was not arriving.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we got
How
a phone call.
old? How old were you? Were you like a late teen, or was this in your 20s or something?
I was 25 or so, I think. 25.
Oh,
Yeah.
late. Okay. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
wasn't like a child, but
Right.
I definitely wasn't fully cooked.
Yeah.
I was still pretty uncooked. And
Yeah.
yeah, I was
Hmm.
something else, man. So
Yeah.
you had the same experience where your brother died, right? Or
Yeah, like where a lot of my trauma is kind of immersed in death. Like I lost my brother who was 10 when I was 6. We lost an aunt a couple years later, so it's like 83, 85. Then my dad passed away from having cancer for 10 years. So I don't think when I really processed, like sort of like in therapy, just how much death and loss and worry was a theme, you know?
I mean, that's to take this like in the direction of creativity a little bit. Like
Hmm.
the first thing that I got interested in when I was like starting to like write about artists and stuff was the prevalence of, and this has been like researched a decent amount. It's not like a theory, it seems like
Sure.
a fact, but the prevalence of really loss in the lives of artists. So like
Yeah.
a death in the family. I mean, artists are in some of the research that I looked at for my last book, artists are twice as likely to have experienced early loss. And I think for writers,
Oh,
in,
wow.
I think for writers in particular, um, it's even a higher rate. I'm just like, I'm ballparking this off the top of my head, but I think for writers, it's like around 50% have like experienced early loss.
Yep.
And so when I was in grad school, I was like researching this question about, well, what's going on here in this relationship? Like, does loss mobilize a creative response in certain people for particular reasons? Like, what is the motivating element? Obviously, not all artists experience loss, and it's not like if you experience loss, you're automatically an artist or whatever. But
Hmm.
there seems to be something in a lot of artists, of course, not all, but in a lot of artists, there seems to be something especially engrossing and captivating and stimulating in a way about a loss experience.
Yeah.
And I was writing about that and thinking about that when I was pretty young. and it was before I had experienced loss. So I had no way of like feeling my way into that, dynamic. But then while I was writing my dissertation, which was all about loss and creativity, my entire PhD dissertation was about loss and creativity. Right
Oh,
when I was
wow.
right when I was writing my dissertation, my brother died. So it was very strange. Like, yeah, it was quite strange because
Oh,
I was right in the midst of writing about this dynamic of loss and how it can mobilize creative responses in some people.
hmm
But I was like grasping around in the dark in a way because I had not experienced it. I mean, now I've had way more than my fair share of it, for
sure.
sure. But
Yeah,
but then all of a sudden it arrived,
right.
and it's a strange combination of circumstances. I remember I sometimes felt like it was sort of like I was being forced to go through this or something. There was some kind of weird karma at play, or like I was being punished for writing about something. I remember thinking, I mean, this is totally
Oh, no, I
irrational.
know.
I
Yeah.
remember thinking, well, I'm being punished because I had the arrogance to like write about loss when I hadn't experienced it or something. It was very strange.
Yeah.
You go into like when I'm sure you know this, but like when you go, because you've experienced it too, but you go into really these sort of like magical, distorted perceptual modes when loss occurs. You just almost,
Yeah.
it's almost like the whole world becomes miracled up or something. And you're just like, I don't know, everything seems to have an abundance of meaning, or it's
Yep.
things seem unreal. In other words, like it becomes sort of psychotic-y and things become a bit unreal for a long time.
Sure.
That's what I felt like. It was like being on mushrooms or something for a,
Yeah.
you know, um,
And that was actually the root of my trauma treatment was and it's really powerful to kind of talk about this kind of stuff existentially about sort of like what happens to a human being around the death of somebody else is sort of it's kind of like the wild west. Like no one's it's just it's just kind of unfigure outable kind of a thing. But I think our system wants to find meaning, and the trauma for me was around self blame around what I could and what I couldn't have done to save my brother,
yeah,
and I didn't work that out till therapy. But it's interesting in the way that as humans we try to find, like, in other words, you're writing this dissertation about sort of like then that magical meaning making or thinking is like, did I cause this by writing about this topic, and
exactly. That's
do I
exactly.
have those magical
And then
powers
I,
or whatever? Like it's just
and then
a
I, that's what I
really
mean about how your mind goes into this
yeah.
like very unreal frame where
hmm
you're just not really thinking very clearly, and all kinds of like impossible magical things come to mind. And you're always like, I was having intonations of him a lot, where I remember one time I was in the bathtub and I think I might have had the window open slightly, but like the curtain really stirred in a particular way, like right
I know
next to
what you
where
mean.
I,
Yes.
yeah, and I felt
Right.
like there was some kind of visitation. And then you're always sort of, and it was very, I could feel it in I believed it was happening, that there was a visitation. It wasn't like a theoretical thing. I could feel something
I've had
occurring
that
in the
experience
moment.
too.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then I do think that you're always kind of looking for omens, for sure. I spent a lot of
hmm
time thinking about the last conversation I had with him on the telephone because I probably talked to him the day before or whatever, where he said, "Hey, I'm coming up there for my birthday. Let's have dinner or whatever." I'm sure we worked it out or whatever. And I don't remember what he said, but I remember being sort of like fixated on the last thing that he said before he hung up. Or maybe he had to hang up abruptly or something. I can't remember the detail, but there was something sort of weird about how the conversation ended. So I attached all this meaning to that, and
Yes.
I
Right.
sort of wanted to find it, some kind of
Right.
causality in it or something, or I don't know.
Yeah.
really something
you know?
else.
I think it's all like very kind of human where it's just like trying to deal with the undealable. You know what I mean? Or it's just it's even hard to articulate what that is. But I do specifically remember as a 6 year old, couple things is sort of I think I had kind of a breakdown at the funeral home. Like I just remember staring at a white wall. I mean, it sounds really dark, but it's just kind of almost it's kind of like an appropriate reaction to what was kind of going on. It's just you lose your mind a little bit. I'm like six
Yeah,
years
you
old.
do lose your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I'm staring at a white wall at this funeral
Just
home and
ruin.
remembering cousins telling me I'm so sorry. And I'm like, what are you sorry about? I don't even know what the fuck, you know what I mean? Like, I could not, my 6 year old brain could not. And I was angry of like, why are you saying sorry? You didn't kill my brother. Do you know what I mean? And it's something that a lifetime fixed onto like when people say that they're sorry, you know what I mean? And it's just like,
No,
and
I
then
know what you mean. Yeah, I
I
know what you
didn't I
mean.
didn't realize to my 30s that people say shit because they don't know what to say. You know what I mean? People we say these scripted things because even on their end, that's even sort of a weird. It's almost like death falls outside of the human experience, but it's so human. It's
Yes.
just yeah. Um, but I would
Everybody, everybody, so everybody, I forget, there's this great line by one of my favorite writers, Tom McLean, where he said something like, everybody believes that death happens, but no one believes that it's going to happen to them.
yeah.
Which I feel like it's part of the human experience.
Hmm.
We're like, okay, yeah, it's somewhere out there, but it's not coming
Right.
direction or whatever. I remember
Um,
somebody also saying something, I don't know who said this, but they said, I believe this is quite true. Like somebody said, death is the birth of the image, which was on my mind when I was writing my dissertation. It was on my mind when I was writing my dissertation because I feel like one way that loss, especially in writers, I think, but it could be other artistic media too, but one way that loss calls out for a creative response if you have, the talent and if you're creative and stuff, is that in writing about the lost individual who now is like in your head, you're interacting with them in fantasy now because they're dead, like, but in
yes.
writing about, and anyway, people are in our, even when they're not dead, people are in our heads anyway, but like they really get into your head when they die because you kind of introject the image of that person. And in writing about them at a very simple level, I think it's one way to continue having a relationship with them. You're having a relationship with them in fantasy, but it still is, in a lot of ways, a pretty satisfying relationship, I think. Like if you write a
Yeah.
novel, you write a novel about your brother, like Jack Kerouac did, let's say,
Mm.
you're still knowing them. They're dead, but you're still knowing them. And you're also like, as you're doing it, you're also, I find this to be true when I've done writing like this. You're also like remembering things that you had forgotten because you're like, as
Hmm.
you're like transporting yourself back into that relationship and that time and stuff, it elicits a lot of memories that had been set aside, not because you like repressed them or whatever necessarily, but like just like things you forgot that had happened between the two of you or
Yeah.
whatever. So
Right.
it's almost like a CPR on a dead person to
Hmm.
be creatively imagining them and writing about them and interacting with them in fantasy because you almost do conjure them. Well, you do conjure them and they're back alive. And so I feel like the motivation, I'm pretty sure I talked about this in my dissertation way back when, but I feel like part of the motivation is just to um, resuscitate them and bring them back into being just through the power of your imagination and fantasy.
I love what you just kind of said, the CPR of kind of like it's a lot like the relationship I had with my brother pre-death, I had to like create a new relationship with him afterward. And in that relationship, in my mind, made him to be real or imagined. I love that. I learned that in my psych unit days. Real or imagined. I made him into like a guardian angel, which really kind of worked for me. So I think we all kind of have to figure this out. But very difficult, though. I mean, that's a sibling, a loving sibling relationship. He was my older brother. I really looked up to him, and we were little kids, you know. That's different than what kind of meaning making does someone have to come up with when they lose a toxic parent that they've been in no contact with for like 10 years and then it's just done. So it's kind of
Yeah, with my sister, I mean, I've tried to definitely trying to not sort of demonize her. I want to have, you know, I want to have respect for her death and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. There's less, it's such an interesting thing. There's also this other piece to it is like, I think there's a chunk of grief for the family system as a whole. Because I think what a lot of childhood trauma survivors don't really kind of, especially if their sibling was abusive to them, it's hard because they're very sensitive to this. Where I think I've triggered people and we've triggered people by trying to explain to them that your sibling was both a perpetrator and also someone that was abused as well to become a perpetrator.
Yeah.
Or and sometimes there's just organic stuff going on that causes them to be abusive in that way. But we're really in our work, we're really focusing on a hierarchy of parents on top in terms of a nuclear family system. And what it I find that when people are growing up in chaos and abuse and toxicity, the siblings tend to turn on each other because they have no power. That's not always a universal, but it's kind of like what we see. But we can be, to be blunt, we can piss people off by, you know, and we have to gauge about how ready the person is to hear it, about whether their abusive sibling was also being abused in a way, like where did they maybe learn it from, or that kind of stuff. So, but grieving the family as a whole is kind of like that idea of grieving. It's complex, but I'm not playing God here, but like had my brother grown into an adult, he probably would have we were all traumatized kids. He would have gone through a suffering layer and trying to cope with his feelings and cope with his physical stuff. He was a sick little guy. So it's kind of a mess. I'm just throwing a lot out, but
Yeah, no. My therapist is always trying to going back to the first thing that you said, my therapist is always trying to get me to be more sad, to get in touch with the sadness, like grieving the loss of what I never had, which was family that was, you know, truly loving and caring and stuff. And it's hard to like work your way through just these layers of like blackberry bushes or whatever to get back to those kinds of feelings. It's very challenging.
true. I'm going to introduce you. Well, I'm talking with my good friend, William Todd Schultz. He is the author. I have two of my favorite books by you, so I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. This is the first book that I read. This is Torment Saint about Elliott Smith. I loved both the writing in both books, but this is what started me on you. And then I reached out to you after finishing this book because I became kind of obsessed about his music. I had seen him live in the late 90s, and a friend of mine was super into him. And at the time, I was so into Radiohead's OK Computer, because that's like the time frame. Like that's the only thing that I was obsessed about. I had no other room, you know? So I kind
That
of
is where it's sometimes you don't have any room for any more obsession.
yeah.
That's so true. I know. I feel that. For
But
sure.
I'm proud to say that I saw him live. I enjoyed the show, but I didn't know the songs. And then I bought XO. But this book was so well written, I just had to meet you, and I'm glad I did. And then the other, like the mind of the artist, is really probably what we'll focus on today. I would also love to hear. I heard you're writing another piece in another interview that I saw you with, another book. Is that true?
Yeah, the new book is going in a bit of a different direction, but I am working on a new book. Yeah, I'm working on a proposal right now with my agent. So
Great. So
it's about just I'll say really briefly, it's about
yeah.
it's about this very little known, top secret personality assessment program that was started in Berkeley, California in around 1950. So
Oh, wow.
it began with this program. It began with a government operation where psychologists were hired to assess potential spy candidates and figure out which enlisted men would make good spies. This was like, World War II.
Hmm.
And then after that spy program concluded, they sort of took their talents to Berkeley and founded this top secret institute. And one thing that's cool about it is that one of the groups they studied, and every time they studied people, the people came in for 3 consecutive days. It was like exhaustive um, and
Hmm.
exhausting for the people. And they were subjected to 20 to 25 different kinds of psychological measures, everything from like a Rorschach to a life story interview to all kinds of other tests. They just custom made these.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But one group they brought in were famous creative writers, and no one's ever seen those tests or that test results or the test results. And I got access to the archive at Berkeley, so I've seen all the results. And the writers who they brought in were people like Truman Capote. So Truman Capote went in
Oh,
to
wow.
Berkeley. Truman Capote went to Berkeley. I have my thoughts about. I wrote a book about Truman Capote too, but
Yes.
I have my
Right.
thoughts about. I have my thoughts about why he decided to do this, because it's kind of an unusual thing to do. I don't think any writer would do this today, but like he decided to
Hmm.
submit psychological testing for 3 days, and he went to Berkeley, and I've seen all the results of his testing, from his Rorschach to his life story interview to the interpretations of him. So I'm
Oh.
going to write the book.
Hmm.
In a way, the book is going to focus on the creativity studies because they're the ones that are most interesting to me. And there's a lot of material on a lot of famous writers in there that I can relate in the book, and also a lot of theorizing about personality-based aspects of creativity and aspects of creative process. So it's going to be a fun book. But right now I'm just working on.
Wow. That must be like a gift to have that knowledge or that data of those things in a way to relate it to your work
I
of
knew
just sort
about this
of,
institute. I knew about this institute through my major professor when I was getting my PhD down at UC Davis, and it was always very hush hush. There was like a quality of secrecy about this institute, and uh, the specifics of the data, partly because they were testing real people. There's like
hmm.
ethical considerations and confidentiality considerations, but the specifics of their findings were never revealed. So I
Hmm.
knew of it, but then I had some renewed interest in it like 3 or 4 years ago, and through a sort of like serendipitous process, I ended up getting access to the archive. So it's kind of exciting. I spent a lot of days
Very exciting.
down in Berkeley in this little room with all these file cabinets, going through all of their
Yeah.
findings.
I'm laughing because it's sort of you start off the book about Elliott Smith as you're in his personal
Yeah, that's right.
database.
Oh,
Do you know
that's
what I
right.
mean?
It's
Like
very
you,
similar. It was a
how
lot
do
like
you,
that. It's a lot like
how
that.
did you, how do you get into these predicaments? But the mind of the artist is a really book for anybody. I would love to talk about a little bit about what inspired you to write this book. But for the listener, you are a psychologist specializing in personality. As is that true? And then it's also writing about psychobiography, where it's kind of in a kind of with boundaries, but looking at the personality types of figures in a way like you've done, like Truman Capote, Elliott Smith, and others. You talk about a lot of people in here, and I was just reading about your passage on Bowie, and coming back to what we said about loss. He had a brother who he lost to mental illness. His brother had schizophrenia. There's a lot of, I didn't had no idea till reading that there was a lot of psychosis, I believe, on his mom's side of his family. And you're so I just love everything that you write. You just really bring the person right into the room. So I'm reading your book. I'm like, oh, I gotta go on YouTube and look at the Dick Cavett interview with Bowie in in
Isn't it
70.
good? Isn't it
And
good?
yeah, it's so, but he's so squirrely. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he
He's
was doing a lot
so
of cocaine
thin
in those
white.
years when he was doing all that cocaine, he was basically, I mean, he only ate peppers and milk was the story.
Yes.
He was emaciated,
Hmm.
um, just like major, very dark issues with addiction, getting into um, all of this Satanism and stuff. It was
Yeah.
pretty dark. I mean, he talks about how it was a really dark period, but he
And it
came
made
out of
me
it.
think he did.
Unlike other people, he came out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when for those who are fans of him, I had no idea about the mental illness in his family. Not to stigmatize that, but there's just a lot going on there. I think it's also, um, the mental illness in my own family. I freaked myself out, wondering if it's a self-fulfilling thing. So, you know what I mean? When I'm reading your passage there, he's kind of like shuttering himself in. He's sort of. I remember an interview with Bowie years ago, and he said this with good humor. He was like, "Well, that was a dark period in my life where I shaved my eyebrows and I was trying to change the TV channel without a clicker."
Which I think
I just
might be
love
possible.
that.
I think
Yeah.
that might be possible. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, he talked about how he had a fear of insanity. It was his stepbrother who went insane and was institutionalized, and on his mother's side, just schizophrenia, suicide, lobotomies, institutionalization. So there was like an atmosphere of like real, like genuine insanity in his family going back, generations. And he kind of
Right.
did a self-exposure therapy where he tried to, get close to insanity himself. And like there were times when he felt like he didn't know where Ziggy ended and he began because he had lost
Yes.
himself and a little bit psychotically in the whole persona of Ziggy. And like there were many, and
Yeah.
then the other record, Aladdin Sane and stuff. Like there was like, he talks about this. I mean, one thing about Bowie is that he's, of course, incredibly brilliant. And I've never really encountered another artist who talks so illuminatingly about their creative process and what art means to them and how they make art and
Hmm.
stuff. Um, so
Yeah.
hearing him kind of almost like become a psychologist to himself and think about the dynamics of all of that is really interesting. Like all of his interviews are just captivating, and he has so many interesting things to say. They're all original. Like it's not the typical. I mean, with a lot of artists, like with all of us, I mean, you kind of utilize a lot of cliches to talk about what you do and stuff. They're just kind of like out there in the atmosphere, and you grab a hold of one and you use it to explain what you're doing or whatever. But like with Bowie, he just seems to be always having something new and different to say about what's going on with him. But yeah, in the section on Bowie in that book, I talk a lot about his fear of insanity and how he, in some ways, felt that art gave him a really necessary outlet to deal with it, but on the other hand, it wasn't like a solution or anything, but it was one outlet that he had that maybe other people didn't have for sort of exploring it without losing his mind.
Yeah, and having done, I'm a sober person, and I've done a significant amount of drugs, and way back in the day. But like thinking about when he was, it almost makes me think about him going through a process to test and see if he is not consciously to test himself, but just kind of like really kind of getting, like you mentioned, it was almost like he was exposing himself to insanity. And drugs can make us highly dissociative. That, like I had a poor sense of self when I was doing drugs, and it definitely didn't help. So it's sort of like the barriers of reality get very porous, when you're trying to figure out that kind of stuff going on. But there's also something that was, makes me think about for the listener, not to stigmatize mental health, that kind of a thing, but it makes me think about this is like Thin White Duke is like Young American 74, post Ziggy kind of a thing. But when we think about like the state of what people knew about mental health at that time period, because you mentioned the stepbrother goes to a Cream concert and has a psychedelic experience that might have been the onset of a thought disorder. That's kind of how I understand sort of like there's just people are kind of going along okay, and then they experience something like in that time period of like going to Vietnam or dropping acid or having some kind of very stressful event that might kind of be
There's
the
something else
first.
going on. There's something else going on with Bowie too that's like even deeper than all of that. And it's that, and he recognizes too, because he said at some point, he said this consistently throughout his career, but like at some point later on in his career, he said, I only really wanted to write about one thing. All of my work is about one thing. And the one thing is isolation.
Oh.
He even talks about how even the space figures, floating out there,
Yeah.
relate, of course, to isolation. But he even talks about how he sought out isolation as a creative stimulant, right? Like he would try to
Hmm.
become isolated. And he talks about because he wanted to see what it did to him and how it affected his writing, to feel isolated. And so he talks about how he, did things on purpose, like very intentionally. When he moved to LA, he wanted to go to LA because he hated LA and detested LA. And when he was living there, he hated it even more. I love LA, but my daughter lives there and stuff, but I love LA. But anyway, that's a whole separate
Hmm.
talk. But like, he hated it even more, but he went there because he wanted to be uncomfortable. So he was kind of like seeking this discomfort of isolation in order to see what it would make him right. So there's like two things going on for him. It's kind of interesting. And I can't think of, I've written about a lot of artists, and I can't think of an artist who like intentionally seeks out a location to stimulate creative, process. But like as a subject matter, it was isolation that intrigued him and captivated him the most. And he says in one interview, for 30 or 40 years, there's only one thing I've written about is isolation. But then also he
Wow.
like, yeah, and then he also but then he also sought it out, to make himself uncomfortable. And so he's going to great lengths he is someone who really almost in a quasi-scientific way sort of investigated how he could create spurs to creativity, where he would try to he used the card technique that William Burroughs came up with, not the card technique, but the cut up technique where he would take text and cut up words,
Hmm.
spread them all out, and sort of more or less randomly combine them and use those for lyrical content or to put them onto different lines of thinking involving lyrics. He also tried to create accidents in the creative process using these things that Brian Eno made up called oblique cards, where you would draw a card and it would tell you to play an instrument other than your own or whatever on the track. Or so
Yeah.
like he was always trying to,
Right.
it's almost like he was like studying his own creative process and trying to come up with ways of manipulating it or supercharging it. Or so not only was he like really astute when talking about creative process, he was also like really interested in figuring out how to control it in different ways.
And to great success. Like I'm just thinking about hunky-dory to scary monsters to something like modern love. Do you know what I mean? Just like, it's sort of, um, and even just thinking about like my own daily work becomes very pedantic. Do you know what I mean? Like just like becomes repetitive and pedantic. So it must have been like, I could just see him like, Brian Eno kind of saying, let's get rid of that 12-string acoustic guitar. And here's like a Prophet 5 keyboard, do something,
Yeah, it all
like,
becomes kind of boring. It all becomes kind of boring, and like a lot of like
yeah,
great artists, a lot of great artists, and Bowie is definitely one of those. Is like they're kind of creatively restless. They want kind of the shock of the new, whether it's like John Coltrane, David Bowie, whoever it might be. People are like, they get bored with what they master, and then they want to forge into other kind of domains and discover
yeah,
other modes and other like styles and other like ways of expressing themselves. So I
hmm
think that happened with Bowie a lot. But I was thinking about how most artists, they're not really that, they're almost like superstitiously, they have a superstitious aversion to like thinking about their creative process. And it's totally understandable because you don't want to interfere with it. It's sort of a magical thing. It feels like a magical thing to you, and you just want to hope that it arrives and like hope that the inspiration comes or whatever. And you don't want to think about it too much because because you wonder if you think about it too much, you might kind of clog up channels or whatever.
yeah. Could I come back to? I got some questions prepared. Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah.
We usually have these great meandering things. And first of all, we should tell the audience um, we had an incredible conversation sometime last year. I think in that conversation, we cured like the human condition and we cured human depression.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
It was really good, great conversation. And then the result of it was I forgot to press record or was on the wrong browser. So this is
Nightmare.
a long time coming. So I really appreciate your patience. What inspired you to write The Mind of the Artist? Because there's well, three things. I would love to have the conversation for the listener for the context of bridging the ocean model of personality that you often talk about with childhood trauma and how those two things might overlap. Um, and I would love for the listener, for people who are going through childhood trauma or working on their, not going through, hopefully, but for the who are recovering from childhood trauma, is how do we rebuild ourselves and start to take more creative risks? Because I think I love this book so much in the way that you're kind of you kind of help clean up some of the mud for the reader around what are our expectations around creativity. And then the third thing was, can you, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you, I would love to at some point for you to explain the ocean model for the listener if they're not familiar with it. So I know that was a lot.
Yeah, I've got a lot going on
Yeah,
in my head
yeah.
right now. Thinking about where do I start? But like, well, let me say like start like from a bird's eye view of things. I didn't really have any plan when I started out on that book. I just kind of wanted to write. On one hand, I mean, I had written a book about Truman Capote, the writer. I'd written a book about Elliott Smith, the musician, and I'd written a book about Diane Arbus, a photographer. Written a lot of articles about artists as well. And I sort of wanted to take stock in a way of like, what have I discovered? What's been the yield of all this? What do I believe? I was trying to sort of figure out, this isn't entirely true, but I feel like I figure out what I believe in the process of writing it out. So I was going to just kind of like figure out what are the lessons I've learned from spending these decades, thinking really deeply about creativity and psychology and personality of the artist, the generic artist, et cetera, et cetera. And in the course of like starting to work on the book, which I did when I was down in Las Vegas on this writing fellowship uh, at this place called the Black Mountain Institute, which was fantastic at the time. When I was starting work on the book, um, I was, doing a deep dive into all kinds of scientific articles and theories and stuff. And it started to become very clear to me kind of early on. And this is completely unanticipated. Like this was not a avenue that I had explored a lot in my previous writing about artists, because I was coming at them from more in terms of like psychodynamics and early loss and things like trauma, which I'll come back to in a second. But as I was looking into things more, I started to realize that it's like absolutely undeniable that there's a particular personality trait that predicts creativity more than anything has ever predicted creativity in the history of the world. Okay. And it predicts like everyday little c creativity. It predicts a genius level, big C creativity. It's somehow intimately connected with the structure of the mind of the typical generic creative person, but it's also like connected with motivational themes and how the mind processes information and stuff as well. And the trait is called openness. The long way of saying it is openness to experience. So there's a lot of research into this one particular trait called openness and creativity. And openness also strongly correlates with divergent thinking. So there's kind of this triangular relationship between this personality trait called openness, divergent thinking, which people usually refer to as thinking outside the box, like coming up with fresh solutions to questions that nobody has thought about before or whatever. Divergent thinking, a lot of people think, is at the core of creativity as well, but it's now clear that there's like a triangular relationship between those three variables: openness, divergent thinking, and creativity. The other thing about openness, which includes things like, by the way, people who are high in openness, they repress less. So this would be beneficial to an artist because there's more raw material, there's less compartmentalization, the inner world is less closed off, there's more access to contents, there's more of a blending, there's not, you're not excluding material, you're more open to the material percolating forth. There's also, in people who are high in openness, less filtering of external stimuli. So a lot of really fascinating research on that.
Less filtering of external stimuli, meaning
less filtering, meaning that things are coming in a less attenuated way. There's something called there's something that we all do that's called latent inhibition, where we like unconsciously focus attention and exclude irrelevant information. And we do it automatically. We automatically inhibit flow of information so that we can focus. And what research shows is that people who are more creative, and also people who are high in openness, they inhibit less information by quite a large amount. They inhibit less.
Yeah. And just to,
when you put those two things together, it's like, for people high in openness, they're repressing less. So internally, there's more raw material. They're filtering less. So externally, there's more coming in. And what that says to me is that in terms of like at a mental structure level, they're just creating conditions under which there's more happening in here. There's more happening. And the more that there is happening, the more it can be mined for creative content or creative associations or unusual connections between experiences or thoughts or images or whatever. So it creates a really, really promising atmosphere.
Yeah. And just for the listener, like we're referencing openness from the ocean model of personality traits. That would be openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Yeah, and most
And
like what has happened like in the last, sorry to interrupt, but I mean,
yeah, sure.
just to like say a few more words about that. I should have probably started with that, but like I'm not a huge fan of the trait model. I think it's like a conversation starter. It's like
Sure.
it's the surface, like, you know, we can all like figure out what our trait scores are or whatever, you know. It's like a rather simple thing. I think all the action is in the darker parts of the psyche. But anyway,
Hmm.
it's useful to know your trait score and stuff. And in the field of personality science, my PhD is in personality. In the last like 25 or so years, a lot of attention has turned to traits, and there is this model that's called the Big Five. Other people call it five-factor theory. And the idea behind it is that all individual differences between people can be adequately summed up in terms of how their scores diverge on five fundamental traits. So in terms of like the descriptive level of personality, which is not the explanatory level, but the descriptive level, in terms of the descriptive level on how we differ from one another, like how Todd differs from Patrick, we will
Hmm.
have different scores on those five traits. You might be more extroverted. I might be more introverted. I might be more neurotic. You might be less neurotic. I don't know,
Yeah.
but like,
Right.
so they're comparative. They're all comparative.
Yes.
And what has happened, I think partly because this research is so easy to do, and it can, you know, for somebody who's like trying to get ahead in the field of psychology, they can like really kind of rack up publications. But a lot of people have looked into like what scores on any of the five traits predict about life outcomes. So a lot of people have looked into like, well, what does it mean for your life if you're high in extroversion? Well, one thing they found is that it is associated with higher lifetime earnings, for instance. Or
Oh,
what does it mean if you're high in neuroticism? Well, unsurprisingly, it's strongly correlated with pretty much every depressive disorder, every anxiety disorder, substance abuse, etc. So like people have, and like, let's say conscientiousness, that predicts academic success. Agreeableness, which is how nice you are, that predicts stability of relationships and stuff. So openness is one of those five things. But over time, as people started looking into openness, it got to be known, you know, as the artist type, partly because of
hmm.
the things I was talking about. But beyond what I already said about they repress less and they filter less, um, they also have freer associations. They're
Yeah.
more inclined to magical thinking. They're more fantasy prone. There's a measure of fantasy proneness correlates really highly with your openness score. Um, they experience more perceptual illusions, uh, and they just have a sort of insatiable curiosity about the world. Um, they love analyzing things, trying to make sense of things. There's even research that shows that they like to be confused. Like they like art that is strange and confusing, and they like
Oh, yeah.
passages of text that are confusing. They don't, you know, they're more interested in like questions than answers.
Hmm.
They're not like constantly seeking closure on stuff. Um, and so there are all these qualities that go along with openness that just seem like they clearly intersect with the sort of mind that is more creative. But of course, there are many people high in openness that are not creative. There are many people who are creative who are maybe mid-level in openness, but it would be for people who are like super creative and super productive, like big C creativity, like take somebody like Bob Dylan, let's say. I mean, the odds that they're going to be low in openness are virtually zero. I mean, there's that
Right.
when you look at like, it's hard. You can find really great artists. It's hard to it's hard to think of names of who they are, but you can find really great artists who are probably low in this precise trait of openness. But it's far easier to like talk about the ones who are high in this trait of openness.
So it's funny. I'm kind of like thinking about someone who like just reads this stuff at face value, and they're like, okay, cool. I'll just increase my openness and my extroversion, get rid of my neuroticism, and I'll be a rock star that is making a lot of money, or you know what I mean? Like, so it's just like such a it's you know, like the model isn't. It's sort of like it's very helpful to kind of like look at your kind of scores at kind of baseline. But at one point in the mind of the artist, you talk about there's the macro, which is your score, and then there's all the nuances in the micro. Do you know what I mean? Of sort of
yeah, but even there, it's kind of the same story. Each of these traits, these big five traits, they include 6 facets. So it's so, for instance, the facets of neuroticism, I hope I remember them off the top of my head, are anxiety, depression, angry hostility, vulnerability, impulsivity, and self-consciousness. So each of these 5 dimensions has 6 facets. But again, these are just like scores. They're kind of static. Like, if you wanted to understand, let's say, one of my favorite songwriters, Amy Mann, let's say. Like, if you wanted to understand Amy Mann, if you wanted to understand her art, you wouldn't say, oh, Amy Mann wrote this song because she's high in openness. That'd be like a nonsensical statement, because really what like openness might prepare people for styles of thinking and certain mental states that are productive in terms of creative occupation. But openness doesn't provide the content, it doesn't provide the themes, it doesn't provide the capacity to create something beautiful. It gives you, in some ways, I think the best way to think about what openness does for you as a personality trait, as an artist, is it gives you more access to more material internally and externally. You're picking up on more stuff is going on. You have sort of a messy mind. Joni Mitchell talked a lot about the inner chaos, that you like try to make use of. It's kind of like that. You have a mess in your mind. You have a mess in your mind if you're high in openness. But the question is always like, how do you shape it? How do you create form out of the content? Like, how do you?
Yeah.
If you wanted to. So that's where the more interesting stuff is for me. And that's actually where trauma comes in, because in a lot of the artists that I've written about, this probably is just because of my own personal idiosyncrasies or whatever, but I think it's a more general proposition too. In a lot of cases, trauma, broadly defined, is the raw material. And a lot of artists, whether it's like Bowie we were just talking about, whether it's like Frida Kahlo, whether it's Francesca Woodman, the photographer, or whether it's Diane Arbus, whether it's Truman Capote, whether it's Elliott Smith. And it's a long list. For a lot of artists, the art is, in a lot of instances, a symbolic repetition of negative emotional experiences. Like, I remember this great quote from one of my favorite songwriters, John Prine. We talked about John Prine before. Yeah, he was
but I love him.
If you wanted to, oh God, I love John Prine. What a genius songwriter. Anyway, he said, I don't really want to write a song when I'm happy, because if I was happy and I was writing a song, I would just write like zippity doo dah. He was like, But when my heart's broken or whatever, I'm really sad. I've got all the time in the world. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think the thing about negative experiences is that they're especially captivating, they're unfinished, they're galvanizing, they're puzzling,
Yeah.
confusing. We know that like 80% of the content of dreams in terms of emotion is negative emotion. We know that in terms of
Yeah.
memory research, negative events are remembered more accurately and with more detail than positive events. So there's something about just how negative experience
Hmm.
is engraved on the psyche in a way that other experiences are not. Like positive experiences, like let's say I have a great lunch with my best friend or whatever. Yeah, it's great, but it's not engraved on my psyche. You know, I'm not like puzzling
Yeah.
over it or wanting to write a song about it. But let's say, you know, a super important relationship comes to an end, then I can't think of anything else.
Yeah.
Done.
It's a good point. This yeah, I just remember earlier this week I still had like a couple stress dreams. One when I worked in childcare and one when I worked as a waiter. Like these are just recurring stress. Like the waiter one is always just like I'm waiting tables. My section is totally full, and then so they just gave me another section through another series of doors that I cannot get to. You know, like it's kind of
Classic.
it's like what'll come up like once every 3 or 4 years. Like I have the waiter dream, but I had a question coming back to this model and. um it's not, and we're not saying this model is everything in the same way that someone using astrology might, you're a Pisces and you are this, and you know what I mean? But is this model a little bit like innate material that we're born with? But then there's other stuff that happens, like our conditioning through childhood trauma afterward. Um, that it's all of
Um,
it's not, none of it is like a
yeah,
thousand
it
percent
would be a little
precise.
bit, that would be a little bit like what it is. I mean, there's we know that those five traits are partly heritable. They're about 50% heritable. And in fact, like openness, according to research, is the most heritable of all of them at like 57% heritability. So this
Mhm.
question of like, are people born artists? To the degree that you can be sort of born with a tendency to be high in openness, you would say, well, to a degree, yes, there are like born artists because there's a particular trait that correlates incredibly powerfully with creativity and it's heritable. You know what I mean?
Right,
So there's like,
right.
and I think you were alluding to this earlier, it's not like you'd be like, read my book and be like, oh, now I'm going to make myself high in openness, because it's not like you can just like, it would be like if you were a extreme introvert, it's not like you can just like say to yourself, oh, I'm going to make myself high in extroversion or whatever. It's just like the ability to like change those fundamental trait tendencies really starts to drop off around age 30 or so. Up until around age 30 or so, research shows those traits are pretty changeable, but they kind of get, the phrase that is used in the research is that they kind of get set in plaster around age 30. So that would be like your trait profile would be, loosely speaking, the heritable part of it. Like, you know, people would say the genetic part of it, although it's just 50% heritability. So we don't really know what the other
Hmm.
variables are. And then, of course, the trauma part of it would be the more environmental aspect, like what sort of
Yeah.
experiences you have. And so it's like traits and trauma in a way. Like
Yeah.
the book is sort of about the book is sort of about how openness structures your psychological life to create a receptivity and a sensitivity that is productive for people who are creative. But then it's also about how a lot of creative people symbolically repeat um, trauma in their art. So it's got a combination of different elements. And on that last point, this goes way back for me, and I don't know how I became so fixated on this question or why I became so fixated on it, but it seems to come up in virtually anything that I write. On that last point, I am not someone who believes that art is therapy. So for the
Right.
artist,
Yeah.
don't want to clarify. I mean, I recognize there's this whole field of psychology called art therapy where people, and I've seen it done on the psych units and stuff. But I'm talking about making art for the artist. I don't think making art for the artist solves deep emotional problems or solves some relationship problems or whatever. Think of the culture at large. I just call bullshit on that. And in the culture at large, I think there is this kind of lazy, and even amongst some artists who are like trying to explain what they're doing and they're making use of circulating cliches in the world or whatever. Even in some artists, I think there's this belief that art is like axiomatically or intrinsically therapeutic or something. And I just do not believe that's true. I think art making is crazy making to some degree. The main thing that you want to do if you're an artist is to make something good, and that's fucking hard to do. So
Right.
I know many artists. I am one myself, and whenever I talk to them about this subject, they just laugh their head off because like art is just like, it's so grueling. I talk about this in the book. It's so grueling, and there's so much self-doubt. And you're not really trying to use it to like analyze yourself. You're just trying to make something good, that people are going to respond to. And so in some ways, art making creates problems.
Right.
I mean,
Just thinking.
at a minimum, it creates aesthetic problems because you're trying to like every song you write, let's say, is like every moment is an aesthetic judgment and some kind of aesthetic judgment from like chord changes to like lyrics, whatever it is. So
Yeah.
it kind of creates problems, but then it also creates problems in a more practical sense just because it's so grueling and difficult. Like we started talking about how I'm working on a proposal for a new book, and I'm like, part of me is like, do I even want to write it though? Like,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
know.
it's so hard. It's so hard. Like it overtakes your life, and there's
Right.
nothing else that you do except that thing. And it can just be exhausting and draining. So I've always been interested in this question of whether art making for the artist can be therapeutic, and I just don't think that's what it's set up to do. I think therapy is for therapy and art is for art, and they're not like.
Yeah, you're another sort of, for the listener, another reason to sort of pick up the mind of the artist is like you're addressing the myths that we have about creative people and creativity, and it's a myth. And I'm with you. It kind of drives me crazy. Like, I was chuckling a little bit because you could just picture an artist, like a songwriter, being interviewed, sort of like, that must have been so therapeutic when you wrote that song about your son who died.
They're
Do
asked
you know what
that
I
all the
mean?
time. They're asked that all
Do
the
you know what I
time.
mean?
Yeah.
It's just like there's just, and like the creative person, like, well, I was just fucking going through something. You know what I mean? It was just, I didn't
Or
really.
a lot of the time, they'll just kind of pick up on that because they just don't want to go any deeper, and they'll be like, "Yeah, it was very therapeutic." They'll
Yeah,
just
like,
sit.
yeah, fine,
I mean,
fine.
that seems to be like when people who don't make art themselves or haven't really thought very deeply about it interview artists. That's kind of like anytime you write something sort of semi-dark, the first thing they're going to be asked in an interview is like, was this therapeutic for you? I mean, it's such a like ensconced belief
Yeah,
within the public at large. And maybe that's why it drives me so insane, just because I
right.
just want to blow it up, because I just don't think it's an
Yeah,
appropriate way of thinking about what art is about, especially if you think it's just like automatically going to be therapeutic. There are only two artists that I've searched far and wide too. There are only two artists who have ever tried that I know of. And if your listeners like have other examples, I'd love to hear them. There are only two artists that I've ever discovered who tried to use their art for a therapeutic purpose. One was Sylvia Plath, who
Okay.
wrote on purpose, partly as an outgrowth of her psychotherapy that she was in towards the end of her life, the very last months of her life. She wrote on purpose poems about her dad and poems about her mom. The one about her mom was called Medusa. The one about her dad is the most famous one of all of her poems. It's called Daddy.
Yep.
And the whole idea behind those, which then they were written days apart, by the way. So it's almost like a school assignment. The whole idea was to exercise the demons of those two relationships, right? But clearly with Plath, that didn't work. You know, I mean,
Right.
the only other person that I have come across is John Lennon, who, of course, like with the primal scream therapy and that it was Plastic Ono Band record. I think that's his first solo record. I'm not sure about.
Is that Instant Karma time period, like right after, or
for that? Like on that
okay,
record, he was like trying to use his songs to exercise the pain
right,
of his
Mother.
childhood and the loss of his mom. And the first song is called Mother.
Yep.
He screams like crazy on it. The last song is called My Mummy's Dead on the record,
Yep.
which is this kind of very creepy, dark lullaby song. My mummy's dead. I can't get it through my head. Though it's been so many years, my mummy's dead. So much pain, can't explain. I could never show it. My mummy's dead. It's like so it's like he's trying to. It's almost like even in the album itself, which starts with the song Mother, where he's screaming a lot about his mother abandoning him.
And he's saying goodbye specifically in that song.
Yeah, but then he gets to the end,
right. And then
he still can't move past. It's like, can't get it through my head. My mummy's like, he's still stuck in the same spot.
Right.
So those are the only two that I know of who really tried, because I don't think most artists are, like 99% of them, they're not trying to use their art for therapy. Like I said before, they're just like trying to make something good.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to remember that the number one thing that artists are trying to do is make something good. That's the whole thing.
Right. And a childhood trauma twist for the listener is trauma and openness overlapping, just kind of plugging this stuff in is I didn't start playing drums at the age of 11 to fix my family or fix myself. I started playing drums at 11 because I wasn't good at sports in a very sport-oriented suburban town, and I wasn't good at school. So my strategy was a trauma strategy, was around how do I separate myself out from other kids? I wasn't even attracted to the instrument. Then I got a drum set and started playing, and I got into Phil Collins around 1989, and I just started liking it. Like it was almost like a dumb story. It wasn't like I'm going to do this. And then I was massive.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
You know, because I think like how many traumatized kids looked at the Beatles in '64 and said, that's how you get love. You have all these screaming girls and they, you know what I mean? But that's how you become a person. So I think that
that's how I'm going to fix it all, is by doing, that's not what, no, you're making such a great point, because I think we just start doing things, because we like doing them, but then we find out that we're good at them, and that's the motivation to keep doing them. You know, like we get,
and then it tortures us.
We get enjoyment out of being good at them, and then we want to get even better, and then we drive ourselves insane. But but it's not like that's not therapy, though. That's just enjoying something good. You know, when you're good at it, and you keep doing it, but that doesn't solve your relationship with your angry father, or it doesn't solve your troubles at school or whatever, but it does give you a good feeling when you're doing it. And you're not, I think what you said to start out with too was really interesting, because you don't have any it's not like you start doing it with any purpose in mind. You just figure out it feels good to do it, and then you just keep doing it. That's what happened for me too. Exactly.
There is a really nice thing that comes in terms of when we're trying to rebuild our lives after childhood trauma and try to heal from it. I'm big on this is sort of becoming more creative. It might be that you're growing up in a family like, oh, you'll never, you know what I mean? You're not a painter, you're not a writer. Do you know what I mean? I was told by my father that I would be good working with my hands, and he didn't mean rocket scientist or brain surgery. He was telling me, you would be a good laborer. So in some of the messaging, so I've got great enjoyment about um, doing some like, doing a lot of therapy. A lot of therapy allowed me to take a risk and start putting words together and write a song. And I got great enjoyment out of that. There's some torture to it too. Is it good? Is it good? Am I progressing? Or, and that all of that kind of happened. I got better at it. Um, but for the listener, like there is a thing in the toxic family that parents can be greatly threatened by creativity, and then it has to go underground, or we can be really wounded by it. Like, you know what I mean? Like if I remember playing guitar for my mom at one point, and it was an acoustic guitar. And, my mom is a very blunt, kind of like happy, drunk Irish lady. And she's like, well, your fingers are really screeching the strings there. I don't know if that's for you. You know what I mean? Like, so these like brutally blunt, or if she heard me sing, that was it, I mean, it took me years. I would be singing on stage in a band. And it took me years to get out of my head and enjoy what I was doing. Because my mother kind of said, well, you'll never be a singer, because she heard me singing casually in like when I was 13 years old. So there's all this kind of wounding that happens with it. But I think it's like, I mean, it's a cliche, but a bit of the hero's journey is for the listener to sort of like, you know what? It's painful, but go try to paint, go try to write, go get good at something, because we have all these wounded rules that's just like, oh, I could never. Because I remember,
I feel like if creativity is threatening to those kinds of families, there are a few different reasons. Like one is that it's wild. It can't be controlled.
yeah,
It's not tameable, and it's not
the
going to be
threat.
forced. It's not going to be forced down the really restrictive avenues that the family requires, like all of the family delusions and family lies and family myths and everything. It's like too feral, But then also the other thing about it is that it has too much potential to bring about illumination.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's almost also like, especially for families in whom there are writers, there's the fear of the exposure of the secrets, like the revelations about what really goes on. And like there's this cliche in writing circles about how, yeah, any family who has a writer in it better look out, because eventually it's going to come back around to that, subject matter. But
Yeah. And
I
this is
think
the thing.
creativity is threatening because it's so uncontainable, and it's just kind of wild. Has kind of like a coyote energy to it. But then
Yeah.
also it just has the capacity to express truths in ways that are undeniable, but are also kind of like opaque a little bit. So I mean, it's just such a way of communicating that's very threatening. I remember by the way, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I remember when I was working on, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a detour, but I remember when I was working on the psych units, I remember this one psychiatrist who was like really adamant that patients not be allowed to be creative because it would just be decompensating. So
Mhm.
and so we were told, don't give them any pens, don't give them any paper to draw on or whatever, which just seemed insane to me, especially because it's
And
so boring in there and you need something to do.
yeah.
But but again, it's like the capacity for creativity to kind of destabilize, like
Yeah.
upset things or
Hmm.
throw a wrench into the works.
Yeah. And whether that the person has a rebellious, whether the artist has a rebellious spirit or not, it is a very, even if it's that psych unit thing, I'm still kind of sitting with like that's also very inhumane.
Yeah, right, I know.
But it's like the same idea, like sort of don't rock the boat. Or I've also had many clients, this is the thing, many clients who were really terrified to bring something to our group work that was written on paper or become creative in some way or tell the truth because they had a parent who would read their diary. So I've had many clients who have, my mentor taught me this, you dialogue on paper between your non-dominant hand and your dominant hand to talk to your inner child or get to some subconscious kind of stuff. And I love it. It's a really fascinating, really helpful tool. But I've had many clients terrified of going there for fear that someone would read it. And we're really speaking back to that trauma around whether we're looking at the 5 point model or not. There's just such trauma around. It's not safe to be expressive,
Yeah, I mean,
whether that's creative or not. You know?
that's really interesting. I've thought about that a lot too. It's sort of like whenever you're doing something creative, there's something taboo about it. It just feels like to me, like, I don't, there's something like, personally, I always sort of like need to be alone when I'm doing it. Like, I really don't want anyone else around, which also implies that there is something secretive about it or whatever. But I guess it just has to do with the fact that, yeah, you're hanging out with, you're taking your insides out, you're hanging out with your insides, and there's a lot of like strange,
Yeah.
um, scary stuff in there. And when you
Yep.
go when you go into those kinds of dark places, you don't always know what you're going to find or how it's going to come out.
Yeah. And I know what you mean. Yeah. It also, thinking about the conversation, that it's hard to separate out because I know what you mean about I like to create in kind of private. You know what I mean? Like I can handle distractions to a certain level, but like I'm someone that needs a lot of personal time and downtime. I used to need that too much, and I've had to grow and be more present with people that I'm close with. So that's also a truth in it too. But thinking about this model and then our childhood trauma stuff kind of going on for those who identify as sort of having it is it's kind of tricky to figure out like um, where do we kind of fit in all this stuff? Like in other words, when you just said, um, I need isolation a little bit to create in that way, or that creativity feels like a taboo. My brain, typically always going for the childhood trauma stuff, kind of goes, I wonder if it was really unsafe, or if we would get in trouble or be bad to be expressive in some way. Like if in a really standard way that some kid is just doing their drawings like they do when they're 4 or 5, and they're growing up in a very religious or shame based home. Do you know what I mean? Where the parent does not know what to do with that drawing, and it's not malicious, but it's still like, oh shit, you know?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it seems like a lot of creativity is about saying things in a way that they haven't been said before. So you're saying something, so you're literally saying something when you're expressing it that is new. And
Hmm.
if you're, so if you're doing that, again, it's a threatening thing. It has the capacity to disturb like established shibboleths within the family, or like truths that people have manufactured over time, and you're saying something different in a new way, and that could bring on shame, like you're saying, for you, like betraying the lies,
Hmm.
that you've absorbed for so many years within the family. uh, and when you first absorb them, um, you aren't capable of even like considering them because you were so little. They just kind of like, it was through osmosis that you were picking up all of these lies. So there could be shame sort of over the betrayal of speaking truth. And then there's a lot of self doubt where you don't know, like you start to question yourself, like you've been so indoctrinated within this really damaging system that you probably feel unworthy of speaking out.
Hmm.
When you start to come to different conclusions, you probably start to doubt yourself or question yourself at least, or there's kind of the how dare you thing that you're asking yourself even. Like people like
Yeah, that's a
I wrote
really
an article a little while ago about my family, and there was a pretty large response to it, and a lot of people had said to this didn't even cross my mind, strangely enough, when I was writing it. And it was completely about my family history and stuff, and about narcissism and stuff. And when I heard from people about it, they were all like, I can't believe how brave you were to like talk about all of that stuff. Like, again, it's sort of like, and it never occurred to me that it was brave at all, you know, because again, I was just like focusing on making something good, you know, and, you know,
yeah.
telling the story in a way that would appeal to people. But it was, again, it was like, you're not supposed to air that stuff. You're not supposed to be honest about what really happened. Like, weren't you worried that it would hurt your family? Like, you know, don't you like owe it to them to like keep that sort of stuff within the family or whatever? So there's
Mm.
at every level, like there are like punishments awaiting you for when you go in that direction, because you're doubting yourself and you punish yourself with shame. The world is like, how dare you do this? You know, there's like, um,
Yeah, and just
there's a
like
lot
it's
of
into
stuff that you have to like overcome to be able to do it even.
right. I've gotten similar feedback in the way like, how do you openly talk about your family
Yeah.
in these videos? How do you disclose that? You know, and some and
Yeah.
people were kind of just a little bit like, oh shit, you went there, and then some people
Yeah.
inspired, but they're in a place of like, oh, I don't know if I could ever kind of do that. But I love that topic so much from a
Yeah.
place of growth and change is sort of like I'm talking about me in the context of family in a way that therapy taught me that, or therapy really helped me kind of see that I was just a little kid in this system, but I don't have to speak for the system. Do you know what I mean? I can just speak for myself in it. Or in other
Yeah.
words, you know, because it's sort
Exactly.
of like when someone is
Exactly.
expressing to you, like you were so brave, they're also kind of saying, like, wow, there's so much shame going on there. How do you do it? Or something like that. And we can kind of say, well, it's the shame of the perpetrators, or it's the shame of the abusive people, or the I'm a little bit almost I'm in it, but I'm also removed from it. And
Yeah.
it took me a long time in therapy to kind of go, wait a minute, I'm just somebody wrapped up in it. I'm not a representative of it. Or what I would say to my clients, like, hey, you're not an accomplice in this awful story. You know what I mean? But shame tells us that we are.
Yeah, a little while ago, like when probably like about 15 years ago, when my first couple of books came out, someone did a profile of me in the local Portland paper. It's called, it used to be, I think I guess it's still called the Oregonian. And part of the story came out that my sister had hijacked an airplane, and she had put a bomb in a locker in Grand Central Station, and it had killed a
Wow.
New York City police officer and stuff.
Oh,
And
wow.
when the story was published in the paper, my sister read it, and she was very angry at me that I would talk about the fact that she had done this hijacking. She just didn't think it was appropriate that I should talk about it in the article. Um, and at the time, I mean, I'm not proud of this, but like at the time when she told me that, I was like, okay, you're right. Yeah, I shouldn't talk about that stuff. I'm sorry. I apologize, or something like.
Sure.
But now I realize how incredibly stupid that is. And really, I have an absolute, sort of like what you were saying, I have an absolute right to talk about how that experience played out for me and
Hmm.
what it meant for me as a little kid when it happened, and how it altered the course of my life, undoubtedly, like whether for good or bad, I don't know. But so, like you were saying, I'm not the representative of the family or whatever. I'm just the representative of my own truth, and I have every right in the fucking world to like talk
Yeah.
about what my truth is. And I'm sorry that you wish I wouldn't talk about the fact that you hijacked an airplane and put a bomb in the locker that killed a police officer.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that was happening in my life. I'm one of the people who had to live through
Right.
the detonation, so to speak, of that whole situation. And if I want to
Yeah.
talk about it, I'm going to talk about it. So it's been an evolution for me, but like,
Same. Yeah.
yeah, to come to the point where I felt like I could have license and give myself the freedom to like talk about all of these things to the degree that I wanted to.
Hmm. And it's interesting in the way when that family member says, kind of like, what are you doing talking about this? Or F you for talking about this. What's interesting to me in that is they're still saying, like, look, this is about me. You don't exist in this. In a weird way, like it's just like in other words, and I when I went no contact as in my really early 20s for the first time, and I kept trying to establish a relationship with my mother, there was this kind of like, how dare you do that to her and go no contact with her. um the better way to kind of say it is that your sister was still trying to erase you in that. I don't know if I'm kind of being
No, I
clear
understand.
here.
No, it was sort of like yeah, that's a very astute point. I mean, it was sort of like she was saying, "Well, I'm the one that did that. It's none of your business or whatever. You didn't hijack the airplane. Like you're not
As
the."
if it didn't impact you at all when it did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know. There's a
Right.
kind of like, this is a much overused term, but there's a kind of narcissism in that perspective because it's like a total failure to understand how your behavior impacts another person. It's
Yeah.
like
I
even somebody,
know.
even your fucking brother, like somebody who's in your family, like it's like, well, you don't have a right to talk about that because I'm the one who hijacked the airplane. If anyone's going to talk about that, it's going to be me. And it's like there's this tiny voice in you that's like, yeah, but it really had a big impact on my life.
Yeah. We share the
Yeah,
same last name and
yeah.
everybody knows, and like, yeah.
Well, what?
Well, this has been lovely. It's always lovely. We got it recorded for the mind of the artist. If for anyone listening, sort of like, you can't miss with any of Todd's books. I started with Torment Saint. If you're into Elliott Smith, even if you're not, it's kind of fascinating to look at someone who is a creative who also has childhood trauma. But for the mind of the artist, you're kind of giving some really solid advice about, if what would you say to someone who is recovering from childhood trauma and they want to take a risk and be more creative, whether that's write for Medium or open up a cupcake, shop or something like that, like sort of whatever they want to do. And I'm asking a big question here, like, what is some advice do you have for a listener about embracing more your creative self, regardless of the model, regardless of openness, but just kind of going for something?
I would say that I would try to focus on it being an exploratory activity where you're just giving yourself the freedom to go where you haven't gone before. Maybe it sounds like Star Trek, but it's like go
Yeah.
where no one's ever gone before, into places in your mind. I mean, be circumspect, like be careful about it, but go to places in your mind and try to explore and see what comes forward. And if you can work with that raw material that comes forward in some creative way, not in order to cure yourself necessarily, not in
Hmm.
order to turn it into like therapy, or it's not like it's going to obliterate your trauma history or whatever, but to work with the material in a way that allows you to think about it in fresh ways, maybe liberate yourself from kind of the more common ways you've been thinking about it over the course of your lifetime, and maybe try to understand um, your experience in a slightly different manner by working with it creatively and just kind of staying open to what might emerge and what might, just using it in this exploratory way, whether it's like writing a short story that's partly based on it or doing painting that's partly based on it. Just see what comes forward and don't overjudge it or don't overjudge yourself, but just kind of see what comes forward and then um, take a look at it and see what it might reveal to you. I think that's probably
Lovely.
the best advice I could give about it.
We get really in our heads about what the outcome is when I'm creative, it just helps me feel like I exist and I'm present. You know what I mean? And I'll still get attached to the outcomes of what is this? What am I making? But the process of creating a song or creating
Yeah,
something is more enjoyable than the thing, because later you're like, eh.
absolutely. Absolutely. Great point. Don't
Yeah.
get attached to outcome. Like they say in Zen, no attachment to outcome. Paths are made by walking, like
Yeah.
you just want to like do it without any expectation. And maybe it's even going to go nowhere, and then that's
Yeah.
fine too. So have grace when it comes to like um, how you interact with yourself in the process of doing it also.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure having you. Again, The Mind of
Yeah.
the
Thanks so
Artist is going
much.
to flash it on the screen. William Todd Schultz, and then
Thank
Torment Saint. It's been a pleasure. Love to have you back anytime.
Okay.
Great to
Thanks
see
a lot,
you.
Pat. See you later. Bye.
Be well. Bye.